Hello and welcome to this video lesson series for the subject of computer science class 11th. We are in unit number 2 and today our topic for discussion is execution of a program and errors in program. This is your new chapter. It is completely a theoretical chapter and here we will discuss the steps that are involved in execution of a program, and we will also discuss the errors that are there in a program. Okay, so let's begin. So when a programmer writes a program in any programming language, it is called source code. Source code is written as per programming rules, and it's easier for humans, that means us, to read it and understand. For a computer to understand a program, it must be converted to computer's language. And you know, the language of computer is binary only. That means the language of 0 and 1. Everything should be represented in the form of zeros and ones. So, the program that you have written is in an English-like language, okay, that you can understand, but the computer who has to execute that cannot understand that English-like language. So, we need a program or we need a software that should convert our program to the machine-readable format. So, for a program to execute, it must be converted into binary code. Then only that machine will understand it. That binary code is also known as machine code or machine language code. So the software that translates a source code into machine code, those softwares are called language processors. Okay, so language processors are of two types. Number one is compiler, number two is interpreter. Clear? So when we want to convert a program into binary, we need either compiler or interpreter. Let's discuss them in brief. So compiler and interpreter have the same function, to convert a high level programming language code into low level language, that is binary language. But the functionality is a bit different. Let us see the difference. The compiler takes the entire program at a time, while the interpreter takes single line of code or instruction at a time. So the main difference in the working of interpreter and compiler is that the compiler will read the entire program in one go, whereas interpreter will read each line by line. Means it will read the program line by line. Okay, so first it will read the first line. If it is correct, then it will move to second. If it is correct, then to third, and so on. Whereas the compiler will read the entire program in one go. Okay, and interpreter, as it reads single line at a time, so it will report the error of that particular line if it is there. Then it will, if you will remove it, then it will move forward. While in compiler, all the programming errors are reported to you. Okay, why so? Because it will read the entire program in one go, so it will give you all the errors that it has encountered in your program and it will report it to you. Then you can rectify those errors one by one. But this interpreter, it will read the program line by line, so it will report the error on that line only if it is there. If it is not there, it will move forward. Okay. If we compare the output, the compiler generates intermediate object code, and object code is generated, whereas interpreter, it does not produce any intermediate object code. Working mechanism: the compilation is done before execution, whereas in interpreter, compilation and execution take place simultaneously. Compiler is comparatively faster, whereas interpreter is a bit slower. Memory requirement in compiler is more because object code is generated in between, whereas interpreter requires less memory because no object code is generated. Errors, I have already told you, compiler displays all the errors at the same time, while interpreter displays error of each line one by one. Error detection compiler is difficult and interpreter easier comparative to compiler. Languages that use compiler are C, C++, C Sharp, okay, while as Python, Ruby, Perl, these use interpreter for their execution. The language that we are reading, that is Python, it uses interpreter. Clear? Now steps in program execution. The first step is you write up source code, that is your program, and the end step is the executable code that you get on running your program. So there are multiple steps between those first and the last step. So the first step, there is a source code, that is your programming code. Then it goes through a preprocessor code. Here, if you have included some additional files, those are added to your program. Then your source code becomes expanded code because some additional things have been added to it. Then it goes through compiler phase. Then compiler converts it to assembly code, then it becomes assembly code. Now it goes through assembler phase where an object code is generated. Then there is a linker. Linker means there is a separate module that links your program to some additional libraries. If you have included some extra libraries in your program, it will link your program to those library functions. And after going through these steps, you get the end result as the executable code. Okay, so these are the steps in a program execution. Okay, so we are not going into the depth of these steps, but you just have a look and you can get the knowledge about the steps that are there in a program execution. Now let's move to our next topic of this chapter, that is errors in a program. So when you write a program, there is a possibility that there might be some errors. Okay, so no matter how smart or how careful you are while writing a program, errors may be there because errors are your constant companion. Due to some any circumstances, you may create or errors may occur in your program. So with practice, you will get slightly better at not making errors because this is the beginning of your programming in Python. So with practice, you will get smarter and you will know Python better. So you will make less errors. Because what will happen when you write your first program, you get some errors, then you note in your mind that these errors may occur in my next program. So next time you are more cautious. Okay, so those errors that have already occurred will not occur in your next program. So that's why you should practice more and more programs. So with practice, you will get slightly better at not making errors and much better at finding and correcting them. Because you have to find out the errors and you must correct them. Okay. So there are three kinds of errors in a program: syntax error, runtime errors, and logic errors. Okay. Let us discuss them one by one. Syntax errors. These errors are the errors where the compiler finds something wrong with your program and you can't even try to execute it. For example, you may have incorrect punctuation or may be trying to use a variable that hasn't been declared. So the syntax errors are mostly related to the grammar of that language that you are using. Okay. Errors are in every language, whether it is English, Hindi, or your programming language Python. So if you perform an error related to the grammar, if you perform a grammatical mistake, then those errors are called syntax errors. Okay. Syntax errors are the easiest one to find and correct. The compiler or interpreter will tell you where it got into trouble, because the grammar has been made inbuilt in that interpreter or compiler, language compiler or language interpreter. So it knows the grammar. So it will check your program and it will mark that there are some grammatical mistakes. Okay. And compiler and interpreter best guess as to what you did wrong. So these are easiest one to find out. Usually the error is on the exact line indicated by the interpreter or compiler, or it can be in the line just before it. However, if the problem is incorrectly nested braces, the actual error may be at the beginning of the nested block. Okay. So mostly when you are working with Python, the interpreter will report some error. So it is most probable that the error is at the same line where Python is indicating. Sometimes it can be in the line just previous to it, just before it, or in the block or in the statement 2-3 statements before it. Okay. So mostly it is on the same line, but it can be in the lines before it. So you must see the lines before it also. Okay. First you should check the particular line where the error has been reported, and after that, if you are not able to find out any error in that line, you must go upwards and see the previous lines, and there might be some errors in those lines. Okay. So clear? Syntax errors are grammatical mistakes. The errors related to the grammatical rules. If you violate the grammatical rules, those errors that will occur will be called syntax errors. Okay. Great. Now let us move to logical errors. What is logic? So, a simple definition of logic is a way to solve the problem. How you solve the problem is called logic. So, if you have misinterpreted the problem and you have written the code wrong, then you will not get the desired result. So if you are not getting the desired result from your program, that means you have not implemented the correct logic. That means there are logical errors in your program. The syntax is correct, the program that you have written is grammatically correct, but the result that was expected from it is not being generated. That means there are some logical errors. So, a logic error or logical error is a mistake in a program's source code that results in incorrect or unexpected behavior. Logical errors cause a problem to work incorrectly. So, a logic error produces unintended or undesired output or other behaviors. So, if you are not getting the expected result, that means there is some problem in your logic implementation. So, first thing that you have to understand the problem. If you understand it correctly, then you should implement it correctly. Then only you will get the correct result. So, if you are not able to understand the problem in a proper manner, you will not be able to implement the correct logic and you will not get the intended result. Okay, so it will be unexpected result. That means there are some logical errors. So these errors are hard to find out. Often the only clue to the existence of logic errors is the production of wrong solutions. Though static analysis may sometimes spot them. There is a method called static analysis or dry run. We call it dry run in a programming language. What is dry run? Dry run means to execute the program in a notebook with the help of copy and pen, not with the help of interpreter or compiler. Okay. So if you have written a program, try to run it by yourself. That means consider yourself as an interpreter or compiler and run that program line by line while noting down the values in a sheet and note down the result. So this method is called dry run. So using this dry run approach, these logical errors are find out and you can spot them. Okay, because if you have implemented the logic incorrectly, so the result will not be as per your expectation. So it is hard to find out your own logical mistake. Some other person may find it out, but if you are alone and you have to find it out, you must dry run your program. Run the program considering yourself as the Python interpreter. Run that program and note all the values of the variables in a sheet and in a separate column note down the result. So using this method you will be able to find out the portion where you have implemented the logic incorrectly. Okay. Next we have runtime errors. So runtime error, the name is absolutely clear. The errors that occur when we run the program, those are called runtime errors. A runtime error is a program error that occurs while the program is running or executing. These types of error cause a program to terminate unexpectedly. There may be some hardware or software failure due to which your program will terminate unexpectedly. A program crash is the most noticeable type of runtime error. Suppose you are running your program and it just crashes. That means there is some runtime error. Okay, because the program unexpectedly quits while running. Let us see some examples of runtime errors. The first one is divide by zero error. If you are dividing two numbers, suppose x upon y, and the user enters the value of y as 0, then the result cannot be calculated. So it will be a divide by zero error, and this error has been executed or reported at the runtime because you have asked the user to enter the value of a and b to calculate a upon b. The user enters the value of b as 0, then this is a runtime error. You are not expecting the user to enter 0. Okay, and second example is calling invalid function. If you are naming some functions incorrectly, so this is also a runtime error. So with this we come to the end of this chapter. This was a completely theoretical chapter. From this chapter you will get the questions regarding these errors. What is error? Any misbehavior or anything that is not as per your expectation in a program, and the thing that is not letting the program run correctly is called error. So there are three types of error. Syntax error, that is completely related to the grammatical rules of the language. Logical error, when you have implemented the logic wrong or if you have misinterpreted the problem, that is logical error. And runtime error, those occur when the program is running. Okay, so these errors are the main questions from this chapter. And if you try to understand these errors, because you have a long way to go in programming, so these errors will be there when you write a program. Okay, due to some mistake or lack of concentration, sometimes these errors occur. So you have to find out those errors. Sometimes what happens, that interpreter reports the error but you are not able to find it out. So the only solution is practice. With a practice and practice and practice, lot of practice, you will get experienced with the errors that occur in your program. And after some time, after 2 or 3 years of this programming practice, you can easily find out any error in your program if it occurs. Okay, so let us conclude this lesson here, and we will meet in the next video lesson.